Hi, I'm Tom Hendrickson from the Agile Online Summit. We have a special guest with us today. Kris Kelso is an author and business coach. He recently published Overcoming the Imposter, Silencing Your Inner Critic and Lead with Confidence. I have my copy here, just finished it. So, Kris, introduce yourself to the people here at the Agile Online Summit.
Thank you, Tom. So glad to be here. I am a two-time entrepreneur, but prior to that, I was actually a software developer for many years, spent a lot of time in the healthcare industry, and was building software in the late 90s, early 2000s, really about the time that Agile was sort of becoming a real thing and starting to gain traction in some companies. And so I was in technology, and in 2007 founded my first company, which was an IT consulting firm, and ran that for several years, grew it to 7 figures in revenue, and then co-founded a second company that was a platform as a service built for the healthcare industry. So another very tech-centric business, ran that for a few years. And then for the last 4 years, really, I went and got certified as an executive coach, and I have been working primarily with business owners and their leadership teams, mostly small business companies, as an executive coach and doing leadership development and training on all the things I've learned from growing those two businesses.
Yeah. And as we were talking before, Kris, I told you, many people in this Agile community deal with imposter syndrome. So that's why I thought it'd be great to have you here. But to kind of bring us back, tell us why you wrote this book.
Well, I experienced imposter syndrome for sure myself, going from being a software developer to managing software developers, and then eventually founding a company, and really quickly found myself thrust into executive boardrooms and being, a consultant to CEOs and CIOs and leaders in some very, very large companies at certain points. And so I have definitely experienced imposter syndrome, which is, for anybody who's not familiar with the definition, is that feeling that maybe you're not what everyone seems to think that you are, that your success may be more the result of luck and chance than it is your actual merit and hard work and value, and that maybe you're at risk of someone figuring out that you are just making it up as you go, that you're just figuring things out along the way and you don't really completely know what you're doing. And I felt that way many times, especially the more I had success, the further my career progressed, the more I found myself in audience with very successful and really smart people, the more I would find myself feeling like, boy, I'm really, how did I get here? I'm in over my head here. So I experienced that personally. And then especially as I began to coach entrepreneurs and business owners for the last 4 or 5 years, I found it to be one of the things that is almost universal. And so I wrote this book. It's largely about entrepreneurship, but it's really about anyone who is pushing the boundaries in their own life, in their own career, who's stretching themselves and who's, working hard to make a change and learn something new, and how you're going to battle that tension along the way of feeling like you're out of your comfort zone, you're in over your head, and to share with all of those people the lessons that I learned in my own fight with the imposter.
Yeah. And you tell some really good stories in there. I know, just to kind of pull out a few, but you talk to a few entrepreneurs that really you're vulnerable with. And they come out and say, oh, this is so good that we can have a conversation, a real conversation. And I think that you are so authentic in this, Kris. And I think that's one of the things a lot of people in the Agile space try to be authentic and try to be vulnerable, because I'm sure you see this with a lot of the executives. Sometimes there's a facade that they don't want to break that wall. And it's kind of hard, isn't it, sometimes?
Yeah, it is. And the interesting thing, that I guess the great irony that I found about imposter syndrome, is that imposter syndrome is the fear of vulnerability. It's the fear of being exposed for what you really are. For people, the fear of people seeing you as you think you are. And yet the antidote for imposter syndrome, the cure in the end, is vulnerability. Because once you open up and once you just get real and say, hey guys, there are things I know and things I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to be the expert in an area that I'm not. I'm just going to lay it out there and tell you where my expertise begins and ends, and I'm going to tell you the things that I'm working to learn and where I'm trying to grow. And when you're honest and open about that, you sort of disarm that inner critic, that voice that's trying to tell you that if people figure out who you are, they're not going to respect you. Well, the best way to get over that hurdle is to let them know who you are. And then you oftentimes find out they still respect you. And that starts to diminish those fears, and they just go away because you sort of take away the ammunition.
Yeah. Why do you think it is, Kris, that the imposter syndrome strikes so many of us in so many different industries?
Well, it definitely impacts entrepreneurs, creatives, people that are pushing the boundaries. In fact, statistically, it is more prevalent among high achievers. And that's counterintuitive at first. You would think that self-doubt and feelings of inadequacy would be less likely to plague someone who's very successful and very driven and very motivated. But when you really break it down, what you find is that people that are driven and motivated, people that are trying to stretch themselves, are often putting themselves in positions where they don't have all the answers, where they're figuring it out along the way. They get out of their comfort zone more frequently and maybe more severely than your average everyday person who's just content with punching a clock and collecting a paycheck and going home to watch TV or whatever. So I think that, it's counterintuitive until you really dig in and realize the more driven you are and the more you're willing to stretch yourself and take a risk, the more likely you are to get in a situation where you feel like, man, I'm not sure how I got here, and I feel really in over my head, and I probably don't deserve to be here, but I've just got to figure out how to make the best of it. And that's actually a good thing. That's a good sign, because it means that you're not standing still and you're not just sort of wallowing in your expertise, but you're striving for something more and something greater.
Yeah, really growing. So you shared a little bit with us, Kris, about how to deal with it, but tell us some more techniques and how we can deal and handle with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I mentioned being vulnerable, and that's a really critical key skill to develop. And but another thing that I think is important for overcoming imposter syndrome is to reframe the idea of failure. And what I mean by that is, if you fear failure, if you're worried about a mistake or a failure or an error, being a black mark on your record or exposing you as not the expert people think you are, you're going to be risk averse and you're going to avoid taking chances. But if you can reframe failure as not the opposite of success, but as part of success, failure is a step in the process of success. And in the book, I give dozens and dozens of examples of very successful people that failed their way to success. One simple one is Babe Ruth was known as the greatest baseball player of all time. He was called the Sultan of SWAT because of his home run records, and he had RBI records and all sorts of statistics. Some of his records still stand today, many, many years after his death. But his other nickname was the King of Strikeouts, because his career total of 1,330 strikeouts was the Major League Baseball record for 30 years until it was beaten by Mickey Mantle.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle held the strikeout record, and yet they're known as some of the best baseball players of all time. And the reason is that they never let the fear of striking out keep them from taking a big swing and from swinging for the fences and trying things. So they had to know that those strikeouts were part of the process to winning games, to getting on base, to hitting home runs, to scoring. And if they were afraid of failure, they'd be more timid, but by taking lots of big swings, they really went for it and they accomplished great things. So there's dozens of other examples from business and politics and lots of different areas where failure is part of the process of success. And a key to changing this mindset, Tom, is to think of failure as learning. I have a personal mantra that I say, failure is only truly failure if you learn nothing.
Yeah.
And as long as I walk away from a mistake or a failure or a problem or challenge that I, maybe didn't overcome, but as long as I walk away from it with some new knowledge and I take something away that I can apply the next time, I haven't failed, I've learned.
Yeah.
And that's part of the process of growing and succeeding. And so when you stop fearing failure and you see it as actually a step towards success, it's part of the process. You can lean into things. And again, that self-doubt, that nagging inner critic that says, if you try this, it's going to crash and burn and you're going to be an embarrassment. You can sort of disarm and say, crash and burn is okay as long as I learn something. And so I'm going to go headlong into it, and I'm going to crash and burn, and I'm going to figure out what went wrong, and I'm going to try it again. And eventually I'm going to be very successful. And I have the confidence in that because I'm not afraid of those failures along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kris, you've shared a lot with us. Any closing thoughts?
Well, I'll give you one last little tip that I've seen a lot of people with imposter syndrome have this symptom where they can't accept a compliment at face value. Right? Someone says, "Hey, Tom, your summit was amazing," and the tendency is to downplay it or to make a joke or to deflect it with sarcasm. And you say, "Oh, well, summits for technology people are not that hard," or summits for, or this, it was all digital, so I didn't really do anything, and we downplay compliments and make jokes. And in my research for this book and learning about imposter syndrome and analyzing my own tendencies, I not only recognize that the inability to just accept a compliment is a symptom of imposter syndrome, but when you deflect a compliment, when somebody pays you a compliment, they genuinely say something nice about you and you downplay it, you're actually insulting that person. You're telling them that their opinion isn't valid, or that their standards are low, or that they don't know what they're talking about. And so I really have tried to consciously be aware when someone tells me I did a great job at something, to accept that for the gift that it is. And don't just accept it on the surface to be nice and be polite, but actually take it and internalize it and believe it and accept my successes, celebrate my wins, enjoy the good things that happen. And it doesn't have to be arrogant or selfish or self-indulgent. It can just be allowing myself to accept the gratification that someone liked the work that I did. And that's okay. And I don't have to downplay it. And so that's just one more little thing that people can start to do to change their mindset around that inner critic and combat those voices that would tell us that the nice things people say about us aren't true. They are true. That's why people are saying them. And you've got to learn to accept that and believe it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on, Kris.
You're welcome, Tom. I really enjoyed it.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. On behalf of Kris Kelso, I am Tom Henriksen for the Agile Online Summit.